against grand juries is one of the things that's actually helping Julian's defense right now, because she's held in contempt of court for not providing information that she had already previously spoken about during her court martial originally. And instead of taking that original testimony, they're trying to force her to or basically to re-say it word for word, or put her in contempt of court again for lying, perjury, or just let her sit in jail until she lies about the situation with Julian Assange.
Or they break her.
Yeah, which isn't going to happen.
That's and she's been very clear that they've already got all of her testimony that is ever going to be got.
Yeah.
They're 100% clear on that. It is also written into law that if the judge in her case believes that more time and more fines will break her, he can keep her incarcerated. But if her legal team persuades the judge that's not going to happen, he has to let her out. That's how the law works. What is working in this particular instance is that there's a concerted effort to keep her in prison. This is the re-incarceration of Chelsea.
Yeah. She spent between 2010 and 2020 77%, so over 7 years in jail for this exact thing. And she also, because it's all interconnected and built into that same web of corruption that they're fighting against.
And Jeremy Hammond, who was part of the Stratfor leaks, was in a minimum security facility in Oklahoma until November of last
year. A few months left before being released, too.
And he was transferred to the exact same facility as Chelsea as the charges against Julian Assange progressed. It's like the intelligence community is trying to get all of the people they already have in the same little spot around this Eastern District of Virginia court. So Andrew's absolutely right. We have to, while we're here, we have to remember that these two individuals are incarcerated here and make some noise about it.
Absolutely.
We want to support the whistleblowers as much as we support the journalists and the publishers who give us this information and do the brave act of putting their lives on the line, essentially, to release this information, to come out and stand up and be the people that say, no, I'm not going to put up with these war crimes. I'm not going to stand for corruption. We are going to expose these things to the public eye.
And the only thing we're missing is the person watching at home. Because the only reason we're doing the live streams is because you are not here with us in person. So
no shame on you for that.
But do what you can with what you have, even if it's getting out in your streets today, in your city, and being the noise there for these people.
And for the one or two people who are tasked to watch this show right now, you can be a whistleblower. We need more of you. If it is your job to monitor these streams, we hope you're learning shit. And you can join the community of whistleblowers. We will welcome you. We're stoked for that. So give it a shot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ready?
Yeah.
Looks like right now we're going to transition into some of the light speaking, and I think they have some prepared speeches and statements. So before we do that, I think I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to
Oh, good. I'd like to thank everybody that showed up today, especially all the people from Baltimore that came out. But also, I want to give a special thank you to the gentleman right over there, Ian Schlackman, for helping put all of this together alongside of us. What we're going to start out with, in May 28th, 2019, Chelsea Manning released a statement in regards to her grand jury process. So if anyone wants to do it with me, we're going to be passing the mic around, reading her statement paragraph by paragraph. Struggles, and her words are our words in this instance, because she is the one that released the leaks, but we are the ones that still live in the country that hasn't done anything about it yet. So this was from May 28th, 2019. Dear Judge Tringa, during the contentment hearing on May 16th, 2019, this honorable court directed me to take an opportunity during my confinement to reflect on my principles with respect to the institution of grand juries in the United States. This letter is a response to that directive. During the hearing, you stated there exists no dishonor in providing evidence to a grand jury. You suggested that the codification of grand juries in the United States Constitution provided ample justification for this institution. In response to my suggestions of preliminary and committal hearings, you expressed skepticism over whether publicly held hearings served the purpose without damaging innocent people accused of crimes. These arguments are raised frequently in discussions about the problems with grand juries. They are certainly not novel to me. Over the last decade, I frequently considered these and many other arguments while forming my opinions about the grand jury process. I wish to present my position in a more carefully and complete manner that an impromptu cajole can provide. After working with lawyers and researchers, I can also now cite specifically sources that support my position.
First, I shall compare grand juries in their earliest form, including the ideas and practical problems they sought to address, to grand juries as they currently operate. Second, I want to clarify that while my objection to grand juries emphasizes their historical use against activists, I also view grand juries as an institution that now undermines due process even when used as intended.
The drafters of the U.S. Constitution, despite their many flaws, possessed a sophisticated understanding of modern political theory. The framers did not set out to short-circuit due process protections. Obviously, to a contemporary reader, we now understand the many flaws and compromises of the Constitution, and see some as inherently cruel and indefensible. Legal human slavery, the legalizing of subordinate civil status for women, segregation, and the disenfranchisement of those who did not own land come to mind.
Some such practices might have struck contemporaries of the Constitution as normal or necessary, but with the passage of time and through the tireless work of millions of people taking bold and dangerous action, they are now obsolete. I am certainly not alone in thinking that the grand jury process, which at one time acted as an independent body of citizens along the lines of a civilian police review board, slowly transitioned into the unbridled arm of the police and prosecution in ways that run contrary to the grand jury's originally intended purposes. The Fifth Amendment provides many of our most cherished procedural safeguards, concepts foundational to our criminal legal system, including due process, a prohibition on double jeopardy, and the right against compelled self-incrimination. The grand jury is also enshrined in the Fifth Amendment. However, prior to the recent publicity surrounding the Mueller investigation, most Americans only know two things about the grand jury. First, people hear that a grand jury could indict a ham sandwich. Early grand juries acted independently as investigations by citizens. Now the grand jury process means the prosecutor decides what the grand jurors see and what they don't see. The grand jury imagined by the drafters of the Fifth Amendment, which did not involve a prosecutor, bears no resemblance to what we see today, where more than 99.9% of indictments sought are granted. Second, we learn another, more sinister thing about grand juries. They don't indict law enforcement. For example, in Dallas, over a stretch of several years, more than 80 police shootings came before grand juries. Only one returned an indictment. Grand juries have protected police officers since the slave patrols. They were used to indict abolitionists, but not people capturing and re-enslaving people seeking freedom from bondage. They were used to indict Reconstructionists while actively protecting lynch mobs. Both the ham sandwich statement and selective indictment happened because of a grand jury's secrecy. Also, a prosecutor's presentation of a case is shaped by their own ideas and goals. There does not need to be any misconduct or bad intent on the part of a prosecutor to influence the grand jurors in a way that destroys their independence. If you look at legal scholarship about the history of the grand jury, you can see how today's grand juries are unrecognizable from English and early American ones. The original grand jury was more than an investigator. They were supposed to protect citizens not just from unjust indictments, but from unjust laws. In England, grand jurors who even allowed a prosecutor to come into the grand jury room were seen as having violated their oath.
I am positive that the founders never intended the grand jury to function like those we see today. If grand juries were actually independent bodies that nullified unjust laws or their unjust application to determine whether it was really in the public interest to decide who should be made infamous under the law, I would feel differently. Reading the history of grand juries, I have read of how, during the American Revolutionary War, grand jurors refused to indict tax resistors against the crown, because while it was technically illegal, the grand jurors recognized that what made it a criminal act was a law imposed by an authority that most of them by that time did not recognize. Nonetheless, the grand jury once provided a modicum of due process, at least to the class of people to whom due process was made available. In 2019, the federal grand jury exists as a mockery of the institution that once stood against the whims of monarchs. It undermines the Fourth Amendment's protections against the unreasonable search and seizure, and the Fifth Amendment's guarantees of due process. Today's grand juries do not safeguard such fundamental rights, and they are easily subject to abuse. Secret proceedings lend unearned legitimacy to prosecutorial decisions that protect the powerful against accountability and overpunish the marginalized. It is not surprising that the members of the defense bar are generally unsupportive of grand jury proceedings. Even the Department of Justice released a report that acknowledging that grand juries are notorious for being rubber stamps for the prosecutor for virtually all routine criminal matters. Moreover, because prosecutors can compel people to show up and testify or produce documents to grand jury without having to show probable cause, their unmonitored subpoena power functions to let them sidestep the Fourth Amendment's protections against unreasonable search and seizures. Imagine a world in which you are not a judge, and were not connected to judges and prosecutors personally. If you or a loved one has charges brought before a grand jury, charges of which you or they were innocent, would you believe for one moment that the grand jury might not indict? What rights specifically would you consider safeguarded by the Fifth Amendment's provision for a grand jury? Consider that it is more than 6 times as likely that you will be struck by lightning than that a federal grand jury will decline to indict. I object to grand juries even when used in the ways that are typically understood to be legitimate.
The ability of grand juries to be abused and used for political ends is entrenched and perpetuated by the fact that jeopardy doesn't attach with a grand jury. So prosecutors can repeatedly bring the same changes. Even though there are some laws that say prosecutors must either show they have new evidence or that it is in the public interest to extend or reconvene a grand jury, this is hardly an obstacle. For instance, Thomas Jefferson had to convene 3 separate grand juries in order to indict Aaron Burr for sedition. But he was able to continue to convene those grand juries until he obtained that indictment. Additionally, in the antebellum South, grand juries routinely indicted anti-slavery activists for sedition, while those in the North sometimes refused, but charges were re-presented to new grand juries until they stuck. In 1968, a San Francisco grand jury was asked by Mayor Alioto to investigate the Black Panther Party. They refused, and the foreman gave a press conference about political overreach. Unfortunately, in 1969, a new grand jury began an investigation. These examples run to the political, but grand jury shopping is something that can be done with any kind of case. Grand juries can also be used to coerce defendants to give up their trial rights and take pleas, both by threatening to indict for more severe charges than are warranted, which we know can be easily done, or by threatening to call a defendant's loved ones before a grand jury as witnesses. The very threat of the secret proceeding is in itself terrifying to people. The secrecy of grand jury proceedings fuel paranoia and fear, running contrary to our ideals of open courts and stoking our disdain for secret testimony. I find when I explain the secrecy of grand juries, people are often truly shocked that they are constitutional and frequently compare them to the Court of Star Chamber.
The court of the Star Chamber existed in England from the 15th to 17th centuries. The court lacked the same process as normal courts and often pursued political and religious dissidents and others who sinned against the crown. It lacked evidentiary standards and proceeded on rumor and hearsay. It imposed all kinds of arbitrary punishments except the death penalty. In 1631, Parliament abolished the Court of Star Chamber as a dangerous relic of the past and as its brutality and capriciousness. The grand jury was once a progressive and protective replacement for things like the Star Chamber. But in the current incarceration, it bears far more resemblance to the Court of the Star Chamber than to its intended role as a bulwark against arbitrary state power. Apart from the fact that the grand jury itself does not impose punishments, the biggest difference between the grand jury and the Court of the Star Chamber is that the Star Chamber proceedings were in fact largely open to the public. I am not alone in objecting to the grand jury as a dangerous relic that evolved in ways that increased its power without increasing its protections. This is not even a partisan issue. For instance, the Cato Institute made a statement critical of the grand jury. Prosecutors defending their actions by reminding everyone that legislators have approved the procedures. Legislators defended what they had done by reminding everyone that the court approved the procedures. The judges defended what they had done by reminding everyone that the prosecutors and legislators are free to do otherwise. And that the people seem to connect, since they have not revolted against the elected officials who run the system. Citizens, in turn, are too often assume that someone in the government is looking out for their welfare, including their constitutional rights. No one takes responsibility for the fact that constitutional rights are slipping away.
During the hearing on the 16th, you pointedly asked me whether I had taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. What is more important than my willingness to blindly follow that document is my commitment to its general principles of due process and fundamental rights. I refuse to participate in a process that is clearly transformed into something that violates the spirit, if not the letter of the law. Since I reject the grand jury process, I am totally ready to propose alternatives to it and point out that such alternatives already exist. Only two common law systems of justice use the grand jury, the United States and Liberia. Even within the United States, half of the states have dispensed with the use of grand juries. While they reliably end with indictments, they do not reliably end with justice. While the grand jury is anomalous in the world, other countries are nevertheless able to prosecute people, demonstrating that there are alternatives to the grand jury. While the United States is one of two countries to maintain a grand jury system, countries that used to have grand juries include England, Scotland, Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, France, Belgium, Japan, and Sierra Leone. In those countries, grand jury proceedings have been replaced by an open and adversarial preliminary or committal hearing system. Additionally, the United States military, through the Uniform Code of Military Justice 10 U.S.C. 801, sets forth procedures for preliminary hearings rather than grand juries, providing service members with significantly more protections than the average person. Preliminary hearings though open the doors to the best of all disinfectants, sunshine. Nearly every country that used grand juries replaced it with these hearings, which save time and expense, don't criminalize refusal to comply with prosecutorial whims, and better equip all parties to prepare for fair and more balanced inquiries into the truth of matters. There exists no shortage of due process, and nothing prevents a witness who wishes to remain anonymous from speaking to law enforcement or the prosecution. A common justification for grand jury secrecy is to preserve the reputation of those investigated. First of all, as noted, almost nobody investigated by a grand jury is not indicted. Moreover, in countries that have preliminary hearings, people have an opportunity to defend themselves, and simply being investigated does not end in ruin.
There we go.
Do you want me to keep going?
Maybe I'll just pull best key.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Now I want to address my specific concerns about the ways in which grand juries can be used politically. Across the world and throughout history, it has been common practice to incarcerate or even kill dissidents and political rivals on the mere suspicion of being a member of an opposition group. While in the United States, we are perhaps less overt in our prosecution of dissidents most of the time. The grand jury subpoena combined with compulsory immunity gives unrestrained powers to U.S. prosecutors to oppress activists and their communities. Generally, people have no obligation to cooperate with law enforcement investigations, but in the context of a grand jury subpoena, people who refuse to talk about their First Amendment beliefs and associations can be locked away via contempt.
During the McCarthy era, when people were publicly interrogated about their beliefs and associations, the public was eventually outraged, and the McCarthy hearings are widely seen as a disgraceful episode of modern history. This questioning, however, routinely happens under the grand jury system. Due to the secrecy of grand juries, the public is less aware of it and less outraged, and therefore it continues without interruption. However, this is because they are unaware it is happening and cannot feel its effects. The investigative grand jury, as we know it, was developed in the wake of the McCarthy during the Nixon years. It was developed purportedly to battle organized crime, but was promptly used to subpoena members of anti-war groups, women's movements, and black liberation groups. Prosecutors issued subpoenas in conjunction with grants of immunity in order to compel testimony, and routinely had resistant activists imprisoned for contempt. For instance, while federal agencies were investigating the Puerto Rican independence movement, several community organizations refused to comply out of solidarity with their communities. They were arrested at gunpoint for contempt of court. Senator Ted Kennedy was not shy about expressing his alarm. Over the past 4 years, under the present administration, we have witnessed the birth of a new breed of political animal, the kangaroo jury, spawned in a dark corner of the Department of Justice, nourished by an administration bent on twisting law enforcement to serve its own political ends, a dangerous modern form of Star Chamber secret inquisitions that is trampling the rights of American citizens from coast to coast. The tradition of using political grand juries to jail political dissidents and activists is long. The concept of a grand jury in which prosecutors subpoena activists and jail them for refusing to comply with the subpoena stands in stark contrast to the institution contemplated in the Constitution. The foregoing is intended to give you a better and more nuanced understanding of my conscientious objection to the grand jury. I understand the idea that as a cut the key out, which would mean killing everything that I hold dear, and the beliefs that have define my path. Each person must make the world we want to live in around us where we stand. I believe in due process, freedom of the press, and a transparent court system. I object to the use of grand juries as tools to tear apart vulnerable communities. I object to this grand jury in particular as an effort to frighten journalists and publishers who serve a crucial public good. I have had these values since I was a child, and I've had years of confinement to reflect on them. For much of that time, I depended for survival on my values, my decisions, and my conscience. I will not abandon them now. Sincerely, Chelsea Manning.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Well, my name is Ian Schlackman, for those of you that may not know. And before I start to say a few words, I just want to say thank you so much to the team that came out here today. Action for Assange, Unity for Jay. Let's give a big round of applause. Come on. This is an amazing event. This is an amazing event. And so too few media outlets are giving attention to this crucial extradition trial happening this week. It is so very, very important because it fundamentally defines whether or not we are going to have the U.S. is going to assert its authority to literally abduct citizens around the world because they do not like what they are saying or publishing about the U.S. government. Now, I cannot understand why. Well, I can understand, but it sounds better if I say I can't. I cannot understand why the U.S. government has such incredible vision into the supposed human rights violations of every other country in the world, yet it turns a blind eye to its own human rights violations, anti-press freedom acts, and trampling all over the Constitution and Bill of Rights every single time. Why do we turn a blind eye to poverty right here in America? Why do we turn a blind eye to what Chelsea Manning pointed out in her courageous letter, to all the injustices committed in the name of America against people of color and indigenous communities, and that continue to this day, whether you're in my city of Baltimore or whether you're on the border of the U.S., where they're still detaining children in concentration camps, literally dying out there. Why can't the U.S. understand that human rights start at home? We must respect ourselves as a country and our own citizens. And until we do that, we have no right to go around the world preaching to others how they should act and dictate. This is an outrageous act of imperialism, and I'm proud to stand here today with my brothers and sisters in this courageous act that we take against the extradition of Julian Assange. And I must mention as well the ridiculous and insane imprisonment of Chelsea Manning and also Jeremy Hammond. We love you, we wish you the best, and we absolutely support your decision not to cooperate with this criminal court. It is a kangaroo court of injustice. You are so much stronger, and I'm just saying this from the bottom of my heart, so much stronger than I could be in that situation. You have all of our love and encouragement in the world. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. I want to hand the mic over to a good friend of mine who I know has a lot to say on grand juries and what they've done, particularly to some of her comrades back in the Panther Party. But before I do, I want to acknowledge one more group that's here today, People's Power Assembly, coming down from Baltimore. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to my mentor, my political mother, Reverend Annie Chambers.
Well, we know, and for you all who, I can give you some history. Chelsea's a political prisoner, and lots of others are political prisoners. This is the history of this country. Because whenever you don't bear to the master's will, they want to be masters. And we're not talking about the masses of people. We're talking about a handful of people that make the decisions that we all must follow under the dictatorship of them. And when we have a strong, forceful person like Chelsea, we just gotta be thankful. I know even till today, some of my brothers and sisters that were out there in the 60s with us, the Black Panther Party, is still incarcerated. It's still incarcerated. And we are still fighting for freedom. We just have to continue to fight. When we have strong people like them, because it is their duty to feel that they will break us. And I often say to brothers and sisters who are in a political fight that the struggle will continue until all of us are free, until we all is up from, under this oppression that we are in America. America is built on lies, destruction. And I am so grateful that I've been lucky enough all my years, over 50-some years, to be out here saying, you're a bunch of thieves, liars, and Judases. And we have to continue to fight. We have to support Chelsea. We have to demand. We have to demand that we stand up and fight. I have two great mentors in my life. Two of my mentors, because, I had a wonderful, terrific father who wasn't in the struggle, but he allowed me to be able to go do it. And I had a Catholic priest who stood by me and allowed me to continue to be in the struggle. But I'm a product, and I'm so proud of it, of two great men. One of them is Minister Malcolm X, and the other one is Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro often said to me, you go back home, people, that they must fight for what's justice of theirs, because you only get what you organize and fight to take. You understand? Minister Malcolm would say to all of us, it's not because of your belief, your religion. It's not because of your faith. You're being oppressed because you're black and poor. Because many people have many lies about Minister Malcolm, but I worked very close with him, and I know how he felt. And one thing, he would say, poverty divides us. Because many whites and many others, races, fought with us in the movement. And when they would say, who gave justice and who for the civil rights movement, who stands for justice, and I love Minister Martin. But let me tell you, Minister Martin would not have been able to do a lot of the things he did had it not have been for the nation and for Minister Malcolm. Because he sent them a message. He sent them a message. He said, I'm going to tell you, when we was down there in Atlanta, Georgia, you touch one hair on Minister Martin's head, and then you will deal with all of us. Because as I teach, and I say to the young people now, they said, well, why y'all didn't start the revolution? Because we had Minister Malcolm who knew what the revolution would do to just one race of people in this country. What it would do to us as one race. So his thing is for us to unite. And that's what he told Fidel. We got to go back and unite the people of America. And that's what he stood for. And that's what Chelsea is standing for. And Assad and many others are standing for. Us to come together and be united to fight this injustice in our country. And when we do that, we will stand together. So let's all come together. No matter what race, color, creed, religion, don't put it all aside. Because we got one fight, and that's justice. Thank you.
I think Eldridge Cleaver probably would have been pretty proud of that. Yep. Yes. I was actually, while you were saying that, I was thinking of a speech that Malcolm X made where he talked about the wolf and the fox. where he talked about how people of color in this country and pretty much any oppressed person has a choice between the Republican wolf or the Democratic fox. And that pretty much perfectly illustrates the political choice that we have today, alternative without choice. And I was thinking, actually, we spend a lot of time focusing on you were speaking about the poverty that we face here. It's pretty interesting to me that somehow we are told that we don't have enough money to reform our welfare system, which is something you and I spoke about earlier. Yet somehow we have $1,000 a day to spend keeping her locked inside of that dungeon over there. That's something that doesn't make any sense to me at all. We talk about universal basic income. We don't have $1,000 a month to give to citizens, but again, we have $1,000 a day to keep her inside of that medieval fortress in there. Something about that does not make any sense to me. And so basically, the only thing I want to say is we need to continue to put pressure on our leaders, regardless of our ideology, to let them know that this is not something that represents our values, and that if this fight is not one for us and for Chelsea and for Assange and for Hammond and for all of the other prisoners and victims of this system, then we're going to keep the fight going for a long, long time. Because you were talking about Minister Malcolm X. Malcolm X is the anniversary of his assassination was just last Friday, I believe. Yeah, 55 years ago he was gunned down, and his legacy continues long after he's passed, and after they've done everything within their power to try to bury him, to make him out to be some kind of a monster, a terrorist, whatever they want to call him. They use a lot of not only racist rhetoric against him, but a lot of Islamophobic rhetoric against him. There are so many of these great people who have been snuffed out by history, like Eldridge Cleaver, and the beautiful writings he did from within a prison system, actually. His best writing was when he was behind bars, because he found that the best of himself was not snuffed out by that authoritarian system.
Battery low.
And Chelsea Manning sets the same example for us, where the best of herself came in those moments of her absolute lowest state. That the statement that we just read, she wrote that knowing all the grim incarceration that was going to be waiting for her after she finished speaking. Now we can't hear Chelsea Manning speak, but there will come a day when we do hear Chelsea Manning speak again. And I do not want there to be a day when we no longer hear Julian Assange's voice again. I want to hear him speak again. I want to hear him talk again. And I want to hear him use that awesome sense of humor that he had to guide us through so many of these horrific revelations that we need to know, because it makes us better and it makes us stronger. The truth will come to light eventually. And I think that the fact that we're still celebrating Malcolm X 55 years after the government gunned him down shows that eventually the truth will come to light with this. Thank you. Free Chelsea Manning. 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 Chelsea Manning. Free Jeremy Hammond. 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 Free Jeremy Hammond.
Battery low. Battery low. Battery low. Battery low.
We are in front of a maximum security prison. You know,
So we're going to take a moment now to read Jeremy Hammond's statement or letter to the grand jury. As many of you may know, I was just a few months from my scheduled release from a federal prison when I was unexpectedly dragged into chains and planes and ragged detention center in Alexandria, Virginia. I am outraged that the government is threatening additional jail time if I do not cooperate with their grand jury investigation. Their draconian intimidation tactics never coerced me into betraying my comrades or my principles. In a spirit of resistance and with great contempt for their system, I am choosing silence over freedom. I am fully prepared for the consequences of my decisions, just as I had been each and every time I was faced with a similar choice before. Long ago, when I realized that government and capitalism were too hopelessly corrupt and unjust to be reformed through legal or electoral means, I chose to engage in civil disobedience and direct action. I knew then that in my action could land me behind bars, yet I fought on anyways. After dozens of arrests and even prior federal prison sentences for hacking, I chose to once again use my computer skills to attack the system of the rich and powerful as part of the anonymous federal case I am doing today. When I pled guilty, I took responsibility for my actions and my actions alone. I never agreed to be debriefed or testify in any way, unlike the government's informant, Hector McGore, aka Sam, those whose reward was 1 year of probation, while I received the maximum sentence allowable by law. It was a painful choice, but 10 years in this dungeon was the price I was willing to pay to have to maintain my integrity. I have never regretted my choices, and every time I have been incarcerated and have seen and experienced firsthand the abuses and inherent injustices in the prison industrial complex, my commitment to the revolution and abolition has only become more deeply entrenched. Now, after 7.5 years of paying my debt to society, the government seeks to punish me further with this vindication. Publicly motivated legal maneuvers to delay my release, knowing full well that I would never cooperate with their witch hunt. But I am opposed to all these grand juries, but I am opposed to this one in particular because it is part of the government's ongoing war on free speech, journalism, and whistleblowers. I am insulted that in those power claims that I have had an obligation that every citizen owes his government to testify. As an anarchist, I am not part of their social contract. I do not recognize the legitimacy of their laws or courts. Instead, I believe in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote, I had taped to the wall in my prison cell for years. One has an obligation to disobey unjust laws. It is difficult to view any of this government's laws as just when they are so selectively enforced and when the government turns a blind eye to its own misconduct. Misconduct that is on display every day that Trump is in the White House. In my case, the government, through its informant Sabu, investigated numerous hacks, asking me to break the government and companies of the world. Nearly a decade later, this misconduct remains ignored. The NSA continues to surveil everyone and launch cyber attacks. Donald Trump and his corrupt cronies continue to hold the world hostage to their megalomaniac imperialist pig whims, while simultaneously refusing to comply with subpoenas and inquiries into their vicious abuses of power. Meanwhile, Chelsea Manning and I are doing hard time in the dump for the crime of refusing to allow our spirits to break. After serving our sentences and exposing government and corporate corruption, this absurd hypocrisy and desperate ruthlessness reveals a crumbling legal system, a system that robbed me of the majority of my adult life but could never take away my humanity. I will continue to do the right thing no matter how long it takes. I know how to do time, and I will never be intimidated by their threats. Ever. I refuse. I really want to make sure that the notion of prison abolition gets put out here today, because the state will always use imprisonment as a means to coerce its victims into injustice, into cruelty, and I'm going to say it, into slavery. Prisons must be abolished in this country. You show me prison abolition in this country, and then finally maybe the U.S. will have a leg to stand on when it comes to human rights. And let me be very clear about my point of view on this as well. I am a revolutionary socialist. The system as it stands now must be changed immediately. Immediately. Because what you see going on with Julian, with Chelsea, with Jeremy Hammond, with Glenn Greenwald, all of that is imperialism. And imperialism does not just mean the United States doing whatever it wants. Imperialism means the capitalist class doing whatever it wants anywhere in the world, any country it desires. It means no real justice for working class people. It means no real justice for the poor. It means no real justice for those that aren't well connected or don't have money in their pockets. Whether you're here in the U.S. or anywhere else in the world, if you don't have a nickel, you don't have a place to live in capitalism. You don't have a dime, you don't have food on the table. That's the nature of the beast that we stand against. And as Julian Assange himself said, that big empire of the state
whether it's the US, whether it's the UK, will step on you like an ant if you get out of line. But he also said, Julian said, that the fact that the machine is stepping on you makes you know that you're a threat. Makes you know that they take notice of you. Does an elephant turn around and step on an ant? No. No. So that means that we are gaining power for those that stand up for freedom, for those that stand up for the rights of individuals, workers, poor, journalists, fierce investigative journalists, some of whom are here today. I want to give a big round of applause for them one more time. Come on. I can't thank you all enough. I really can't thank you all enough for putting this event on today. Investigative journalism is under attack, and you all are putting it right back, shoving it right back in the man's face. It's so very important. They are taking notice. They do know what's going on. So I'm going to end on the fact that, and this gentleman right here knows this better than anybody else, hold every single politician accountable. Every single one of them. You don't win unless you're organized. And organized means getting in their face with as many people as you can. They are not just going to hand you your freedom on a silver platter. You got to earn it. And when you question the narrative every single chance you get, because what we're talking about here today with Julian is so very, very important to understand. It's not just about press freedom. It's about the fact that they don't want you to know what's going on in Venezuela. They don't want you to know what's going on in Cuba. They don't want you to think of Castro as your friend, or the fact that the Venezuelan government takes care of poor people with the money that they have. They want you to think that this is the best you could do, and that if you dare get out of line, you're going to get smashed. But we're going to show them we can smash back. We have the power. We will be in control, and we will not be deterred. Thank you. I want to take my time to thank Chelsea Manning for choosing truth over treason, for exposing the lies of the predator class in wars based on aggression, imperialism, and the torture that we put forth to those that dare speak out. Chelsea Manning has her sentence commuted, and this administration decides to put her back in jail because she refuses to lie about Julian Assange without the revelations from you, Chelsea Manning. We would not have confirmation that they're torturing. I have video of journalists being targeted and killed by the U.S. government. We would not know to me, taking part in what is essentially the illegal imprisonment of a whistleblower, of an activist, of someone who is letting us have more informed decisions of what our government is doing in its foreign policy. It is disgusting. So all of you in there that see Chelsea on a daily basis, I really hope that you say thank you. Thank you for letting me know about the dark crimes of my government. Thank you for letting me know of the corruption of the military-industrial complex. Thank you for letting me know this is no longer a government for and by the people. Thank you. We're about to wrap it up here. We're going to turn over there in just a moment and let Chelsea Manning know that we're still here. But before we do that, I wanted to return to one last topic that Ian Schlackman was talking about a moment ago. He talked about prison abolitionism and how we need to get rid of prisons. A lot of people say that we can't do that because if we do that, then just criminality will run amok, as if it doesn't already run amok here. This is the problem with prison systems. This is the great contradiction of prison systems. Prisons give our government no supposed to do, which is make society better for all of us.
So I was just wanted to end it with this quote. In The Scarlet Letter, a novel about persecution, social prejudice, discrimination, and all sorts of other hideous, unnecessary evils, Nathaniel Hawthorne made an interesting observation about society. Nathaniel Hawthorne said that no matter how optimistic a society is at the beginning of its founding, it always finds the need to build two things, a prison and a graveyard. So today what I would like to say is, let us build a graveyard for the prison system. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming out and traveling to our meeting. We're going to go in between these two pillars and blast our whistles as long as we can for as long as everyone can stand it. With hopes of allowing their income to hear that there are whistleblowers for them. They are not alone in there. Give them more courage in this country every day. One more time that came out here, everyone who traveled from across the country and across the world to be here today. Next time, I hope to have at least twice or 10 times as many people out here. So when we do this event, we can have a line down the road reading Chelsea these documents. Thank you. I just want to say thank you real quick to everyone who watched today. Hopefully next time you'll be out here with us. We will be coming back here again for the second round of extradition hearings.